Hey guys, and welcome back to our channel. So these past few weeks we've tackled some rather large projects here on our small farm. We've planted a large majority of our cut flower garden, we got all of our pumpkin seed in the ground, and then last week we potted up our mums for our fall farm stand. Now if you would like more detailed information on any of those projects, scroll back a few videos here on our channel, because for each project I did film the entire process and I tried to share as much information as possible in regards to how we do things around here. Now this week I thought it would be fun if I took you along to give you a full garden tour so you can see how different projects are progressing right now here in late June. I want to show you exactly what we have blooming right now, and even though it's only been a couple of weeks for some of the flowers and our pumpkin patch, I think you'll be surprised at just how much growth that they've put on. So let's get right to it and get started. The first thing that I want to show you is the sweet pea trellis that my dad helped me build this year. So this trellis is located on the same lot that we put our flower stand once we have flowers blooming. It's also the same location where our fall farm stand goes. But for the parts of the year where we don't have fresh product for sale, this corner sort of sits empty. And so I was really inspired this year by Klaus Delby. He's a Danish gardener that puts together some really stunning display gardens. Now, I bought his book earlier this year. It's called Containers in the Garden, and it's a great book. I mean, I highly recommend it. I'll actually link it below if you're interested. But I was really inspired to create some sort of display piece here at our place. While I have goals of expanding this area into a much larger display garden in the future where people can just come and visit and enjoy the flowers, this year I wanted to start a little smaller. And so I decided to plant some sweet peas along this simple trellis. I mean, it's really just constructed out of some scrap wood and some cattle panels. But so far, it's going pretty well. The past few weeks, the flowers are really starting to bloom, and if you have never smelled sweet peas before, I have to tell you, even the small 8-foot tunnel of them, I mean, it smells pretty amazing. I'm hoping the flowers will continue to grow up and really fill up this archway, but considering that I haven't had much luck growing sweet peas these past few years, I will definitely consider this project a win, even now as it is. This year there was a lot that I changed with the way that I was growing sweet peas, and I think that's why I've had much better success with them now compared to years prior. Now if you're interested in growing sweet peas for yourself, I will say that I'm currently working on a blog post for our website, sort of outlining what I did differently this year, so be sure to be on the lookout for that because I will be sharing more of my experience there. Next up, I want to show you our pumpkin patch. So it's been a little over 2 weeks now since we planted this space, and as you can see, lots and lots of pumpkin plants have sprouted and they're starting to establish themselves. You can see as I drive by these long rows of green, those are the pumpkins. While there are just a few areas that are perhaps a little lighter than the rest, where not as many pumpkins came up, overall I'm really happy with how well this space looks right now. In fact, some of these rows look a little thick, and I may go through later and thin some of these rows out just a bit to make sure that everything has enough space to grow. But it is a relief to see this many plants above the ground right now. I think we're going to have a really good harvest this year, provided that we do get some moisture here soon. I mean, we've had some really dry weather lately. Okay, let's visit the mum pad here quick before we head down to the flower garden. Now, I just shared in last week's video how we just recently potted up these mums. They haven't been in their pots too terribly long, and so there's not a huge difference in their growth. Mums grow at a rate about 1.5 inches per week, so it will be a little bit yet before there's a noticeable difference. Still, we're keeping a close watch on these pots right now, and making sure that they're staying moist even with this hot 90-degree weather that we've been experiencing here lately. I will share more in a couple weeks about how this project is progressing once these plants have a little bit more time to grow. So stay tuned for that. Last but not least, let's head down to the cut flower garden. Believe it or not, even though we are officially in summer, and even though we started all of these flowers early indoors, we're still a couple weeks out before things really start cranking. These annuals, they may look small now, but they are really starting to establish themselves, and in early July they will really start to shoot up and produce an abundance of flowers up until our first frost in mid-October. So right now, before the flowers are here, we're using this time to check off a lot of maintenance tasks off of our list. So this week I laid all the landscape fabric that you see on top of our pathways. In years past, I've always kept our walkways bare, and you'd be surprised at just how fast the weeds grow. Early on in the season, I used to be able to keep up with the weeds. I'd take just a standard hoe and knock them down. And then as I got later into the season, as the flowers got taller, I would just sort of let the walkways be what they were, weeds and all. The garden definitely wasn't always picture perfect, but that didn't really matter to me. I mean, it was a working garden, and it didn't stop us from growing some really beautiful flowers. This year, we're hoping to allow more visitors to our flower field. I mean, we're considering opening up part of our season for you pick flowers. And so it was important for me this year to have landscape fabric laid down in all parts of our garden so we could hopefully keep up with the weeds more efficiently. Now, some other things that we're doing this week and next, we'll start staking our rows so that we can corral our flowers as they get bigger and require support. For our dahlias, we use T-posts because they're larger plants. And then for the smaller annuals, I just use basic EMT conduit that I wrap baler twine around. It's worked well for us at being able to support our flowers.
So the weather report says that we are expected to get some possible storms, possible severe weather. So today I wanted to make sure that I staked these rows. I'm actually going to corral these 3 rows right here. The other stuff's small enough where I'll wait just a little bit longer. But I put these conduit posts every 8 to 10 feet, double-sided in this row. And I'm going to corral them with some baler twine. On some of these tender annuals, I prefer the corral method just because they're a bulkier plant. On some of the more fragile plants, like my dahlias and lisianthus, I'll net them, but it's a pain in the butt to actually harvest through, and so just personal preference, that's why I'm going to corral these rows. And yeah, hopefully it'll be enough to help protect them from the wind if we get any tonight, and just help keep them in the rows because they are starting to take over the pathways.
This week we're also working on weeding all of our flower beds. In the early stages of their growth, our transplants aren't always big enough to shade out all the weeds. And so usually I go through once or twice early in our season and weed around the holes to make sure the flowers have the room they need in order to grow. And believe it or not, we are still planting. So I have 2 rows that are still empty, and I have transplants ready to go into them. To help stagger out the workload and to also help us have flowers all the way up to that first frost, I always like to plant a few successions of flowers about a month after our initial planting. So these rows will have things like zinnias and more celosia. I have dill that will go in there, cress and amaranth. Lots of fun stuff. And of course, we'll still keep planting sunflowers every week. I mean, I usually plant sunflowers all the way up till August because they are so fast growing. Speaking of sunflowers, this is a really great example of succession planting in its simplest form. So here I have an entire row of sunflowers. As you can see, they are all at varying stages of growth. That's because they're planted about a week apart. Since we only plant single stem sunflowers, this really helps to ensure that we have a continuous flush of them all season long. So the moral of the story is that it's not too late to plant a flower garden yet this season. If you have been wanting to grow flowers yourself, you still have time. And if you need a little bit of guidance, don't forget about our garden planning workbook that's available in our online shop. So this ebook will guide you through the process as you design and plan your cutting garden this year. Inside the workbook, I walk you through all the steps that you need to know in order to enjoy a season's worth of blooms right in your own backyard. I've kept it on sale this month again for just $10, so I'll link in the description box below as well if you're interested. While most of the garden looks green right now, we do have some flowers that are blooming. Those are our hardy annuals, flowers that we planted last fall that survived the winter. Yes, they survived even the winter here in Zone 5B, and they are just now flowering. So if you're not familiar with hardy annuals, I encourage you to do a little bit of research. You really need to check out the book Cool Flowers by Lisa Mason Ziegler. She teaches you everything you need to know about this group of flowers. What I love about hardy annuals is that even though they take some getting used to, I mean, it's honestly taken me a couple of years of trial and error before I've gotten the hang of this concept, they fill a window of time in the garden when not much else is blooming. They are the stars of the garden, you know, after the tulips and daffodils are already done for the season and before the summer flowers really start cranking. What's even better is that you don't need a greenhouse or any sort of protected grow space to grow these flowers. And that's what really drew me to them early on. I mean, sometimes you just have to work with Mother Nature and you'll be surprised at just how much you can really grow. So right now we have some feverfew and some yarrow, sweet William and rutabaga, all blooming. We also have canterbury bells and lots of fun blooms that are really unique this time of year. And trust me, I know, after a long season, I know that the last thing that you really want to do come fall is to plant even more. But if you can find the time and the energy, I think you'll be pleased with your results. My fall planted crops have some of the best stem lengths. They are the least fussiest plants in the garden because they've had time to establish some really strong roots. So they can handle a bit of neglect. I mean, they can tolerate drier weather just fine. And because they bloom in the earliest parts of the season, I don't have to deal with a lot of the bug pressure. Unlike my zinnias that get eaten every year by Japanese beetles, you know, these hardy annuals go almost untouched. So I think that about covers everything that we have planted right now. We still have a few more projects up and coming, but I think that it's always fun to check in on the progress that we've already made. I just want to say thank you so much for hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button below. Now, that is all for me, and as always, I can't wait to see you in the next video. Bye, guys.